Hello, everyone. Welcome to, I think, the 5th or 6th lesson of Greek, number 5, yeah. I hope you all did your homework, but I'm not assuming all of you did, so we'll go from there as our premises. So you'll notice that you have a pair of papers stapled together. This will be what we go over today. We'll do a little review and then today's lesson. And then the single sheet by itself is just some vocabulary and exercise for homework that we'll get to later. So today's lesson will be hopefully much easier and a bit shorter, so we'll have more time to field questions, because I want to make sure that everything is down and solid as far as verbs are concerned. So the present active indicative. This actually should say the present and future active indicative. I'm sorry. So today we're going to be looking, if we remember the active indicative mood and tense, today we're going to be looking at the present and future forms. So the intro. The word conjugation, coming from the Latin coniugo, I join together, simply refers to a related pattern or paradigm of verbs. As you can tell, I don't speak Latin. So here are some key points. All Greek verbs are conjugated based on both number and person. We went over this last week, but I just decided to lay this out a little more visually with bullet points and numbers, so it's easier to get these things in. So keep in mind that number and person are what are specified by conjugation. And then the next one, all Greek verbs can be categorized into two main conjugations. First, we have the omega conjugation, which I'll just call the O system, or O verbs, we might say. And then the second are what are called me verbs, which, as you can see, is mu iota. So to explain, the above terms simply refer to the first person singular suffix in the present active indicative. So we saw last week with the verb luo that we have the stem lu, and then we have the person number ending o, which means I, first person singular, which means I. So all verbs will either fall under O conjugation or me conjugation. We haven't seen any me's yet, but we'll get to those a little in future lessons a little later. So the next bullet point under explanation, or the first bullet point under explanation, the me conjugation has much fewer verbs in it than the O conjugation. But it is a much older verb system, which is just to say that we see these kind of verbs earlier in Greek literature than we ever see O verbs. Next bullet point, the most common me verb is the verb eimi, which means I am. And this one in particular is used, I think, around 2,500 times actually throughout the Greek New Testament. And so, as you can see, just as an example, on this verb eimi, we can tell that it's singular and that it's first person because it ends in this me, even though we haven't looked at me verbs before. This me ending is kind of like the omega ending, but it's under, this verb in particular is under a different system, so it doesn't end in the omega. But that's the only one we're going to look at today. I just say it in passing to give you an example. And then the last bullet point, even though that most verbs, what did I say? Oh, even though there are like 2,500 examples of the me verbs, there are far more verbs belonging to the O conjugation, the omega conjugation, which are what we looked at last week with luo and echo and things like that. Question?
So if I'm trying to understand the conjugation is putting the verb with the subject. Is that what's being conjugated?
Yeah, you're what's being conjugated is the verb according to the person and number it's referring to. or that's performing it,
And
I
that
should
can
say.
be in one word like this, emu,
Amy.
Amy.
Yeah.
Amy. Okay.
Yeah, so Amy, we can see that the epsilon iota at the beginning is the verb that's going on, and that's the verb in Greek that signifies being, like to be something.
But that's a diphthong. That
Yeah, exactly, and we can tell that, yeah, good, because over the iota we have that smooth breathing mark. And so we know that it's not a me, it's a me, because that breathing mark is telling us not only to breathe smoothly, but because it's over the iota, it's saying, oh, okay, this is one syllable unit, the epsilon and the iota together. And so that little part of the verb is the stem, and then the me is tagged on to the end, which is to say first person singular. Like we saw last week with luo, the omega was the first person singular form of luo. But this is the only me verb we're going to be looking at today, and we'll get to those in specific next week. So just to conclude, since there are far more O verbs in the Greek New Testament, understanding this conjugation is necessary before we can attempt to read the Greek New Testament. And so our plan for today is we will look at the Greek verb luo, like we did last week, which means to loose. I loose. And we'll be looking at it in the present active indicative and the future active indicative. So, turn the page. And we'll do a quick review of some of the things I listed last week, and I put them in bullet points because I got some complaints and building up suggestions from other people, constructive feedback. And so I've laid it out in a different way, and hopefully this will be a lot easier for you guys to get. So last week we saw that there are two tenses for Greek verbs. Or I guess I should say there are two categories of tenses, because really there are 7 tenses, which are the bullet points. But there are 2 main categories, the first being the primary tenses, and these are the present tense, the future tense, the perfect tense, and the future perfect tense. And if y'all want to take notes, I can kind of explain these, unless you already know these tenses or what they kind of do. Are you familiar with any of these tenses? No?
100% familiar.
I see. So the present tense, which is a type of primary tense, the present tense basically designates an action that is taking place right now, and that can either be, in English we can say, I stop the car. I stop the car. Or we can also say that same statement, but in a sort of continuous action, like I am stopping the car. But both of those we notice are taking place in the present. One is just a simplified version, and one is a continuous action.
One's active and one's passive?
No.
No?
No. The car is being stopped would be how we say, right? Because then the car, the subject, is suffering the action of stopping. Whereas if I say I am stopping the car is the object. And we determine passivity and activity by the subject's relation to the verb. If that kind of made sense. But anyway, so the present tense can either say just like a general statement like, I ride my bike. Or we can say, I am riding my bike. Both of these would fall under the present tense. Then we have another primary tense called the future, which, as you may guess,
Is the future?
yeah, I mean,
It's going to occur.
right, so someone make up a sentence with a future verb.
Stop.
I will stop the car. There you go. And so you notice also that in English, what we have to do is supply the main verb stop with what's called an auxiliary verb, will. I will stop. And so we say that that sentence uses a future tense verb in English. And really, that's technically not true. But in Greek, you can say, I will stop the car in one verb. You don't have to say will stop. You just change the verb for stop. You mess around with its letters, and it will indicate the will aspect of that, or the going to. I'm going to be flying tomorrow. They don't have to say going, they can just say flying, but they change what's going on inside the verb to fly to indicate that future aspect. We also have what's called the perfect tense. And the perfect tense is when you want to indicate something about your present state by sort of pointing at something that you did in the past, almost. So you say, I have stopped the car before. Now that might at first sound like past tense, but it's really not, because what the statement word for word is indicating is that I am in a state of having already stopped the car. If I were to just say, I have stopped the car, I have played with my dog. And we use another auxiliary verb in English, the have, in that sentence. I have played with my dog. So that past tense verb play, as in the case of I have played with my dog, is sort of brought into the present tense by that auxiliary have. I have played with my dog. So that's what the perfect tense does, is it talks about a subject's present state or contemporaneous state by talking about something it has achieved in the past. So it's kind of subtle, but we do use it in English, just not as much as probably some of the ones that we'll get to in the secondary tenses. Does that kind of make sense, that perfect tense one? I have hit the ball instead of I hit the ball, which would be, well, we'll get to that, but that's the aorist tense. I hit the ball yesterday, or I have hit the ball before. That would fall under a primary tense.
So you're saying I hit the ball yesterday is a perfect?
No, I hit the ball yesterday is a past tense. That'll be under aorist. But we'll get to that in a sec. So the last one under the primary tenses is the future perfect. And can anyone try and make up a sentence? Take what you know about what I said about the future and the perfect tense and see if you can make up an English sentence.
I will have stopped the car.
I will have stopped the car. Yes, that's what's called the
Just
future
using
perfect.
those letters
Yes.
we already covered there.
I will be in a state of having done something in the past.
But I will do it in the future.
Yeah.
So it's like
I will have.
this time next year I will have
Mm-hmm.
gone to church.
Yep.
a bunch of times. Okay.
Yep.
So say the sentence again, I will have stopped the car.
I will have stopped the car. So the will is an auxiliary that gets our future covered, and then have stopped covers the perfect part of this. So yeah. No, yeah, that was, you do know it. That was
You should know
perfect.
it from college, elementary school, probably.
Yeah, no, I mean, a lot of these terms are not totally foreign in their concept. It's more the linguistic terminology itself that throws people off or scares them. But really, they're, pretty straightforward once you get familiar with them. So those are all the primary tenses. And we notice that all of these are dealing with either the present or the future. There are none that are talking about the past or talking strictly about the past. And then the second category of tense is called the secondary tenses. And there are three of them. The first one is the imperfect. Now, the imperfect tense, we don't use it a lot in English, though you can say sentences that imply an imperfect statement. But what the imperfect does is it wants to talk about past continuous action. Like, I was walking around yesterday. instead of just saying I walked. So you have a continuous going on in the past, and you're talking strictly about it. So I was playing with my dog yesterday. I was walking around. So we use the ing with the was or the were or things like that.
So you could say, I was stopping the car yesterday. Would that work? as
Yeah,
well,
yeah,
in the same
I was
sentence?
stopping, yeah.
Well, we use that when what are you doing? I was reading a book.
Yeah,
Just chill.
That's
yeah, I
a-
was reading, I was,
That's an imperfect.
yeah, that's called the imperfect tense. Now, if you say I read the book,
Yeah.
that's just a simple statement that does not imply any sort of continuity to the action. So that falls under the next one, the aorist tense. Or, yeah, I guess it is the aorist tense.
It's like past.
Yeah, that's past, but it's what's called a simple past statement.
Past once.
Yeah,
That's
It was
what.
in my notes from last week.
past once.
Once.
Yes.
Instead of past ongoing.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a good way to maybe take a note is the imperfect is past ongoing and the aorist is past once or simple, we might say. And then we have the pluperfect. It's kind of funky like that future perfect we saw in the primary tenses. Does anyone even have a guess as to what the...
Had stopped the car.
Yes, exactly.
Really? Good.
Yes. In the past, I was in a state of having already done something prior to that. So I had finished cleaning by the time that they came.
Or I had played with my dog.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I had played with my dog.
Well, that's really close to that perfect one, isn't it? I have stopped,
Mm-hmm.
or I had stopped.
Yeah, so what the pluperfect does is it takes a perfect statement and just throws it into the past. So you're still talking about a state of having done something. It's just one is pointing at now and one is pointing in the past. So, yeah. So those are all the tenses.
Does the plu mean anything? PLU?
Plu,
Just happen to be the letters they use, but
it looks,
plural, not plural.
no, it's probably has something to do with adding or plus. I really don't know. I think it doesn't seem Greek. It doesn't seem like a Greek prefix to me, so I don't know.
Or
Um,
English, but okay.
But, so yeah, those are the tenses and the sort of, conceptual weight to them. Does everyone kind of have those, or could I re-explain one of them maybe, or?
That helped a lot.
Yeah?
with that.
Okay, cool. So we will recall from last week that in the indicative mood, which is the mood that just indicates something about what's going on, it's not a command. It's not saying run, because that would be the imperative mood. So there are these different kinds of moods that we looked at last week. So in the indicative mood, the primary tenses have to do with the present and the future time, whereas the secondary tenses deal with the past. And Greek has different sets of person number suffixes for the primary tenses as well as for the secondary tenses. So we'll have to learn endings for the present tense versus, say, the aorist tense or the pluperfect tense. So what we looked at with luo last week, where we have in this first graph on the left, or this chart on the left, we have o, eis, a, omen, ete, usi. These are just the endings for the present active indicative. So you would not use these in, let's say, the aorist tense if you want to talk about the past. You would still use the same stem, the lu part, but we use different person number suffixes, and that's what tells us I did this thing. They don't have to use auxiliary verbs. They just change the lu endings, or sometimes they'll smack things on the front of the stem, lu, which we'll get to later, because that That's a bit much, but we're taking a bit by bit. So,
So all the
A bit
tenses have a
much.
different one? Every single one?
no.
Or some are similar?
Yes. Today we're going to be looking at the present and future in specific, those two tenses. And they actually use all of these endings. So you can make future and present, you can conjugate verbs into the future tense by using these very same endings.
Oh.
So we're going to look at how we actually change the stem itself and then build off of that. So yeah, not too hard, but and I made a second little graph that kind of maybe makes it visually more easy to just understand what's going on in the omega at the end. That's the thing that says the I, I am doing whatever verb this is connected to. And the ace is saying you are doing this verb. The A is saying he, she, or it is doing this verb, and so on. So you might want to just keep that for reference. So, on to today's lesson. The present and future active indicative of luo. So the primary tense suffixes, not suffixes, shown above are used in forming the present and the future active indicative tenses. So let's look at an example in the verb luo, which means I loose, like to loosen bonds, or sometimes it can, as Shawn said today, like dissolve things. You loose some connection between, not lose a connection, but loose some sort of
Like a knot.
yeah, like a knot. Yeah, that might be a good way to say it.
I noticed this on the very first page too. When
Mhm.
you say loose, why isn't there what I would call an S in that first present there?
So, which page are we on? Sorry.
No, I'm right where you're at.
Oh, right where I'm
Under
at.
Present
Mm-hmm.
on the lesson, under first, you've got loose, right?
Well, it's luo.
L, and is that the U?
No, that's an omega. That's a lambda,
Lambda.
upsilon, omega.
Okay, there's no S. There's an S in the second one
Uh-huh.
because there's that thing at the end, right?
Mhm.
The S. I guess I'm wondering why the
But
S.
that's the we in the second one. That means we. So it's
Oh, I guess I'm actually
loo,
asking
just-
why.
Just
why?
loo is loose, right?
Yeah, but why
basically.
why isn't there an S sound in the Greek there? An S
For
letter.
luo.
Loose. For loose.
Yeah. It just luo means loose.
Yeah, it just means
There's no
I
S
loose.
sound in
Oh no,
that.
oh yeah, I don't mean to. I'm only using the verb luo because it's a simple word, but it does sound like our verb to loose something, but they're not etymologically related at all.
So
If
it
that's what
doesn't
you mean.
need an S,
Oh no.
because in the Greek it doesn't have an S.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Time with that one.
Yeah, no,
I
I
kept seeing this on when I was looking at. In fact, I think it's John 1:1.
uh-huh.
There's logos,
Mhm.
whatever, but that's got the little S at the end.
Mhm.
But then there were others that had S's in the English, but not in the Greek.
Yeah, that's simply because not all letters will be
So you
they
just-
don't come over in
So we
translation.
just have to learn
Mhm.
that means loose.
Exactly, yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah, so in all of these, the stem will be the same, and that is to say the lambda and the upsilon right next to each other. And that's the little particle of the verb, or that's the little, I guess we could say morpheme, the little piece of the word that is indicating simply the verb to us. And this could be any verb, whether or not it sounds like the Greek or not. But yeah, sorry about that. I have seen people that kind of get confused with the luo and the loose and thinking that there's a connection, or that
Just
they're
looking for the
etymologically
Looking
derived.
for the S
Yeah,
letter in the Greek.
Mhm.
And okay.
yeah, so,
Simple.
Could you?
Hola is
Is it?
hello in English and Spanish, so
There's no
but
A.
there's no A in hello.
mhm.
Type of-
Could you change it to I
that's the
free?
same thing
Use
that
the
you're
word free.
offering.
Yeah, free.
Well, it's close.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
which
mean,
may help
S
basic
seems a little more oomphy than A-ish LOs or something. I don't know. But
So,
anyway.
Yeah, so
Okay, that's just a memorization thing. then.
exactly. And another way we could translate luo is free. I free something. So that might kind of help clear the confusion. And maybe I'll start doing that in the future
Oh, no,
if there's a connection that's not actually
I
there.
understand that. I
So-
guess I was hoping for easier translation,
Nope.
transliteration. or something.
Sorry, it's Greek. So yeah, so luo is just to say I free this person. And so let's, well, why don't you guys look at this chart for a little while and tell me what sort of differences you see between the present and future, and what sort of similarities you see.
There's that third letter in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that is a
Well, there is a
I
sigma.
don't even know.
sigma. Very nice. Yeah,
Well,
that's-
that's my S.
there's your S.
Okay.
Well, your sigma.
Sigma.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have.
Pronounce the future first.
Well, why don't you do that?
Luso?
Luso.
Luso?
Yes. So if I say luso, and you're a Greek, you understand me to say I will free Paul from prison, or whatever. Because when we stick this little letter, and it just happens to be a sigma, there's no reason that it's a sigma. It's just that this is the way, it's just the way it is. So when they stick in this little morpheme, which is the sigma in this case, they tag that onto the end of the stem, the lu part, and that tells me that it's going to be a future verb. Yeah?
So the suffix on every one, present and future, are the same except for the sigma.
Exactly. That's so a similarity that we see here is that none of these endings change. So you know that if I say lusomen, that you say, oh, well, that sounds like luomen, but there's an S in there. And I know luomen is we are freeing. So lusomen must be we are going to free, right? So, yeah.
It isn't always the sigma, is it? Every.
Yeah, for the future,
I mean,
for
all
future tense
verbs?
regular verbs, yeah.
Really?
Yeah, it'll be the sigma. Yeah, pretty much. I guess I misspoke. What I meant to say is that there's no reason that it's a sigma. It's just what Greek started saying, and I don't know how languages come into existence. They just happen to do this, and then they grow these patterns, and then they stick to it, and we call those the regular verbs. And then we have irregular verbs, which do different things. But, we'll get to those in future weeks. So for now, the takeaway basically is that you don't have much to learn for this week, except that when I see a sigma tagged onto verb stems, which I'll give you a lot more verb stems in your vocabulary for this week, you'll know, okay, I'm dealing with the future tense. And then you look at the ending and then you conjugate it and say, okay, am I doing this future thing, or are they doing this future thing, plural, third person, or is he doing this future thing, which is singular third person. So that's how that's how I'm gonna want you to sort of break down how to conjugate these verbs. To restate what's already been noticed, you may have noticed some similarities and some constant differences between the present and the future forms of the verbs above. The main feature distinguishing these two paradigms is the verb stem. So let's break what's going on down. To get the verb stem, we remove the person number suffix, which for the present active indicative is the omega ending. So we remove that from luo, and then we end up with the stem, the present stem, lu. Okay, now the conjugation for the present active indicative of any O verb, any omega verb, can be obtained by first substituting the present stem of the verb for lu, in this case, and then by adding the primary active suffixes. Does that kind of make sense to people? So when you learn more verbs, the way that you're going to conjugate for the present active is just take off the person suffix ending of that verb and then add on, yeah, I guess I made this part a bit redundant and maybe a little confusing. Well, I think just going on, we'll see some examples. So, for example, a new verb that we have is grapho, which means I write. And so the present active indicative forms of this are grapho, if everyone wants to repeat, grapho, graphes, graphe, graphomen, graphete, and graphusi. And so these are, who wants to translate the first one? What does grapho mean? I write. What does the last one mean? Graphusi. They write. Or they are writing. So that's another thing for the present tense that we saw under the primary tenses. In Greek, it's really up to translators as to whether they want to say John the Baptist is coming down the road. Well, I guess that's kind of hard to say. That's hard to say in a simple tense.
Like comes down the road.
Yeah, he comes down the road, or he is coming down the road. So for instance, on this last one, graphusi, we could say they write, or we could say they are writing. So we could do the simple statement, they write. They write every Wednesday. It'll say graphusi every Wednesday. Or you can say graphusi this Wednesday, which means I am writing this Wednesday, right? And so, like I was saying, it's basically up to how you interpret the context of the passage as to whether you want to make this a simple statement or a present continuous statement, like I write or I'm writing, because you can translate grapho either of those ways. Nothing actually tells us.
Is there ever a way to indicate that? Or you just...
No, it's all context-based. Whether it's, I mean, things like, well, yeah, grapho Sunday. Grapho on Sunday means, well, grapho on Sundays is a simple statement, so that would be I write on Sundays. But if I say grapho this Sunday, you wouldn't say I write this Sunday, you would just say I am writing this Sunday. Mm-hmm. So whether or not extra words are in the sentence that are indicating something about you need to restrain this to a simple statement or are opening it up to having you make a continuous statement, those are just going to be in the sentence outside of this word, because it can be translated either way.
So these suffixes, if we memorize the suffixes here, we'll know the tense, either present or future, and they're consistent. I mean, they're not.
Yeah. The present and future are going to be the same for the active indicative. Yeah, regardless of the verb stem. So whether it's luo or grapho, they're both ending in that o, right? So yeah, if I say grapho, you might not know the exact verb, but if you hear grapho, you know I'm saying I do something. I mean, you might not know that it's writing, but you know I'm saying I, because you've memorized the O part of it, yeah.
The part of the stem. The stem is the first part,
Mm-hmm.
and then that suffix. Right?
Yeah, exactly. If I say...
So grafso, is that future?
What's that?
The future, grafso.
Grafso. So that's a good question, and that's our next section. Well, actually, no, it's not the next section. It comes at the end. There's something tricky that happens when a stem ends in a consonant, but that'll be the very last little section. But good question and good guess. So if you'll turn the page to the last one. So by removing the person number suffix omega from luso, which means I will free or I will loose, we're then left with the future stem, which is loose, and it's spelled lambda upsilon sigma. So this then becomes the verb stem for the future active indicative. So notice that Greek indicates future time by adding this sigma to the present stem. But keep in mind the fact that the person number suffixes remain the same whether in the future or the present tense, and it's the stem itself which changes from lu to loose. And what I'm trying to point out here is that it's not that the stem lu in the word luso stays lu, and then you throw a different ending, which is sigma omega. No. You change the stem, and you put the sigma onto the lu, so then it becomes loose. And then you know that all conjugations that you build from that will be omega by itself, or ace by itself, or a by itself, or omen by itself. So you don't throw the sigma onto the suffix ending. I mean, Greeks would never have to do this because they already know what's going on. So this is all sort of artificial, but for reasons that will become clear as we get further and further into Greek, you have to know that the stem itself is the part of the word that is actually being modified when we go into the future tense, if that kind of makes sense. I mean, it's a simple thing to say, but I just want to make that very clear that we go from lu to loose when we go from luo to luso. We don't go from changing the ending from o to so when we do luo, luso, if that kind of makes sense. We keep the o the same. So it's lu, o, or loose, o. It's not lu, o, and lu, so. Right, that's not what occurs. It's the former of the two examples. If that kind of, does that make sense to everybody? We're changing the
Changing the stem by
yeah.
adding the sigma.
Exactly.
Rather than the O.
Mhm.
That makes it singular,
Mhm.
or I.
Yep, that's precisely it.
Yes.
So in this case, the sigma is called the future time morpheme. And all a morpheme is just a term that designates like the smallest part of a given word in any language that can hold meaning on its own. So if we have the word, it's hard to think of a word when you got to think of one. Like,
It's like adding an S to an English word, right?
yeah, okay, there's a simple example. If we want to say hit, there's only one morpheme in that, and it's spelled H-I-T. Now, if we have the verb hits, there's two morphemes, H-I-T and then the S, because we know that the S in English it carries meaning with it that changes the whole thing. But we wouldn't say that H is a morpheme in the word hits. Or like if you have disestablishment. Dis has meaning on its own, and it's doing something to establishment. And then establish is also a morpheme. And then ment is a morpheme, because if we have establish, that's the main morpheme. Then we have establishment, which changes this whole thing into a noun instead of a verb, establish. We go to establishment. And then we have disestablishment. So,
Modifiers or something.
yeah, they're kind of like, they're kind of like
Big one.
modifiers.
Like that.
No, he's cracking that linguistic joke over there.
Pulling a fast one.
Yeah.
I thought it was supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
It's a real word.
But it does sound quite atrocious, doesn't it?
I can't even say the word that you said.
Anti-disestablishmentarianism.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
That's full of morphemes.
Exactly. The ism at the end is one of them. So, and anti and dis. So, Anyway, to finish this paragraph, I had to pause to explain. So the sigma is called the future time morpheme when we're tagging it onto a verb stem. And it is basically equivalent to the English auxiliary verb will, as in I will go to the store, go being the main verb, will being the auxiliary verb. So we might break down the word lusomen in a graphic way for more conceptual ease. So first we have the verb stem lu, which means to loose or to free. Then we add the future time morpheme, the sigma, that's the third letter. And this kind of carries the weight of our word in English, will. And then the omen part of it at the ending is designating first person plural, we. And then by the end of this, we get a fully conjugated future verb, namely lusomen, which means we will free, or we will loose. So the lu is carrying the actual verb itself. And there may not be a sigma in there, and if not, then we don't have to deal with this English auxiliary verb will. And then we have, of course, the person number ending, or the suffix omen, or ete, or usi, or just o, or whatever. And that will tell you whether it's we, or they, or I. And then you end up with a full conjugation. And you notice again in English, we have to use 3 words to express what Greeks can do in one word. They can say lusomen. And that means we will free.
To make it sound, not to sound like Yoda, but are they thinking to themselves, Greek people, loose we will, or?
I don't know. I really don't know. I don't think,
Loose
I don't think so, no.
Or in this case, it's loose will we?
Loose will we? Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I don't know if anyone can answer that. They probably just think totally different than us.
They just hear the whole word.
Yeah, they just hear the whole word.
And they know the components, and they just.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, because it's like, if I say,
That's a good call out.
if I say something like, he threw the ball, you don't go through and say, oh, he throws, past tense throw. Like you don't break it down, so it's kind of like a light speed thing, or speed of sound thing rather. So that would be my guess, but I really don't know. I mean, it very possibly could work that way, where because they do have such long verbs sometimes, or long words in general, they might do something like that, but I really don't know. But
Well, and I wonder if that has anything to do with, like, it wasn't a lot of the Bible written, like, in the negative? Like, thou shalt not, instead of, I don't know.
Yeah, you mean
You know,
instead
like, a
of-
lot of the statements are in the negative rather
Mhm.
than just stating them in the positive.
But Jesus reversed it, and he spoke more in the positive.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's true.
I was
Instead
just
of-
wondering if they thought negatively as
First.
they flipped it around.
No, I just wouldn't confuse it that much. I don't know. I mean, because even when I say we're going to go free, like you don't think about those words even individually in English. You get the whole idea like that.
Picture that.
You get the future, you get the we, you get the verb itself, the freeing. Or we're going to go spill, we're going to go hit, we're going to go. You just catch all of it. So.
And we have to say 4 words and they say 1 by just changing it,
Mm-hmm.
basically.
Yeah. Yep. So, take note. You will notice that the only difference between the present and the future tense forms is that the future tense forms contain the morpheme sigma. And so the first person singular form, luo, is called, you might want to underline this, the present active principal part. This is kind of some new English vocabulary we're going to be learning about. And then the first person singular form, luso, is called the future active principal part. So we have the present active principal part and the future active principal part. And all regular verbs have 6 principal parts, each of which has the first person singular ending. And today we've already learned 2 of these 6 principal parts, which in turn make up a vast amount of the forms you will encounter in the Greek New Testament, though not all. So just keep in mind the positive side that you've already learned 33% of the active and indicative forms of all regular verbs in Greek. If that cheers you up, because it sure cheers me up.
Yeah.
Ready for our doctorates.
Yeah, exactly. And then the question that Mr. Vongsgaard asked earlier will now be answered. So there's this thing in Greek called amalgamation in the future tense. And so he asked very pointedly, well, if I want to say, I will write a book, do I say grafso? Do I just throw that sigma right after the phi, between the phi and the omega? Right, so we have grapho means I write. And then if I want to put that in the future, don't I just follow the formula and throw a sigma right there at the end of graph and say grafso? Well, here is the answer. It's called amalgamation. So many Greek verbs form the future tense by adding the sigma to the present stem. However, when the stem of a verb ends in a consonant, a phonological change, which is to just say a sound change, will occur when the future time morpheme sigma is, quote, attached to the stem. So here are the following changes. First, if a stem ends in beta, p, or phi, and then we throw on the future morpheme sigma, what it's going to do is these two are going to combine into psi. So thus the future of grapho is not grafso, but gropso. So the phi in this case adds with the sigma and just becomes a new letter, which is psi. So it becomes gropso. And there are reasons for this that I don't know if I'm totally equipped to explain, but I do know that I was kind of explaining a little earlier before the lesson that the letter phi used to be pronounced in older forms of Greek as p. So we have beta, p, and p. And you notice that all of these are what are called labials, and so they're made with your lips, b, p, and p. And when you say that with an S, it's just a lot easier to say. I mean, if you have a verb ending in P, or a verb stem ending in P, and you add the sigma, you're already saying ps. So you might as well just make it into one letter and go ps, right? So that's kind of why they do it. And same with bs. It's not quite as easy to say bs as it is to just say ps. So you're almost doing the same thing with your lips. The same part of your mouth is moving, but it just kind of simplifies everything. So bus and pus and fus all become ps in the letter psi.
How do we know that's ending in a consonant? I see the R there, but how do we know it's not the A, it's the end of the stem?
Oh, just because you know that the omega is the only part of this word that is the person number suffix. So what you do is you knock off that omega at the end there, which is the I, and then you have a verb, and let's say that we don't even know what grapho means. You know that the omega is saying, I do this thing, right? So you knock off that omega, and you're left with the stem. I mean, that's the only process. It's like a one-step thing. So you knock that off, and you got the stem, which is graph. Does that kind of make sense? I mean,
I'll work on it.
yeah, I mean, you take off whatever ending is already on it, and you know that there's no ending fo. Fo is not a person number suffix ending. Fo is not. It's O. It's the O part of this word that you know is.
We're talking about number one, right?
Yeah. Number one, the grapho.
Okay. So
Gamma, rho.
I guess I'm not sure why I know that the P is the end of the stem, not the A. Am I missing that?
Oh, the phi? The phi versus the alpha?
Well,
Yeah.
I'm saying P, but it's the R, right? That's a gamma, rho.
Gamma, rho, alpha,
So how
phi.
do I know the rho is the end of the stem, not the...
Oh no, it's not. The rho's not the end. The phi is the end.
Well, what word am I looking at? Where's the original word?
Grapho. Grapho is the whole word. And so if you just cross
No,
out,
That includes the amalgamation.
Okay,
though. right?
Right here.
Right, but that includes the amalgamation? Or doesn't it?
No, that doesn't.
Oh.
The first
so
one is
when you
grapho.
add the-
Yeah.
When you add that with the sigma, it gives you that.
Yeah.
So the present is the first one listed, grapho.
Oh,
It
so
says
it's
the future of, I guess, the present, grapho,
Okay.
is
So the
grapso.
stem is everything before the omega.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
that's right, okay.
No worries. No, I'm glad it got cleared up because,
I was looking at just for us, the YP, the gamma
Uh-huh.
rho thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
and then, so this amalgamation rule is just to say that we don't spell it gamma, rho, alpha, phi, sigma. We just combine the phi and the sigma into a psi. So it becomes gamma, rho, alpha, psi, omega. And then the little the parenthetical remark at the end kind of explains the word that comes right before it. The second types of letters that also amalgamate with the sigma are gamma, kappa, and chi. And these are what are called guttural consonants. You notice they're all made at the back of your mouth. G, k, ch, g, k, ch. And when they combine with the sigma, we get the letter xi. And so, for example, the future of ago, which means I lead, is oxo. It's not ogso. You don't keep the gamma and add the sigma. What you do is you knock off the omega, and you know you got og, and you say, oh, now I've got a verb stem that ends with one of these that amalgamate with the sigma. So you mix the gamma with the sigma, and you get a xi. Now alpha xi is your stem, and you once again add back your first person singular ending o, and you get oxo, which means I will lead. Does that kind of make sense now?
It does. Are
So-
the PSI and the KSI, are they always the amalgamation?
No.
Can they also be used in other words?
Yeah, you'll see them arise. This is just something that happens in verbs.
Does it just happen?
They take advantage of these what are called diconsonantal letters, x and ps, and I guess that's it. Yeah, those two. Then the third category are called the dentals, and these include delta, theta, and tau. And when they combine with the sigma, they simply equal a sigma. So thus the future peitho, which means I trust or I trust in, it simply becomes peso. So you don't say from I trust in peitho, you don't say peitho. And we don't have a TS diconsonantal letter. There's no single letter that does ts or th like we have in x and ps. They don't have a letter that can just sort of simplify that. So what they do is they just take out that last consonant, whether it's a delta, tau, or theta, and they just totally replace it with the sigma. And so then your stem becomes P, epsilon, iota, sigma, pace instead of paith, and then you add the omega to say I. Yeah, so does that answer your question, Mr.? Sweet. Kind of a fun little thing. So for this week, I've got 10 vocabulary words. 10 vocabulary, I guess is the appropriate thing to say. And they're all verbs, so they all designate action, and they're all regular verbs. So, and they're all they are all omega verbs. So I didn't give you any me verbs yet, which we'll get to later, like I am or something like that. So I want you to kind of get these memorized. I've given the present active indicative and then the future active indicative of all of these verbs, so you see how they work. But keep in mind, these are just the first person singular forms of these verbs, in first the present and then the future. And then I've given on the right-hand side a translation. So ago is I lead and oxo is I will lead. And then some of them that I could think of, I gave parenthetical English words that do have these roots that we see come through, like the word to hear. That is supposed to be I hear, not I head. Akuo means I hear, and akuso means I will hear, for instance. And
the second one down.
yeah, that should be I hear, not I head. That's just a typo. And we see this Greek root come through in English in the word acoustics, which has something to do kind of with hearing or sound. So yeah, I've listed all these for you guys. And then what I've done in the exercises is all of these are either in the present or in the future, and they're all active indicative. So you have all of the rules for how to do this in today's lesson in the stapled 2 sheets. But what I've done is I've changed the person number suffixes, so the endings. So you're going to have to probably write out 2 or 3 words, or 4 sometimes, to translate one of these exercise words. So look at the word, take off the personal endings, find your stem, figure out if it's an amalgamated stem or not, so that you can know if it's future or present, and then just look at your person ending again, and then write out the translation in English. So that's kind of it for the exercises. The homework is reread the lesson. I think that'll help a lot. Nice and slow, nice and carefully. I've tried to make it more visual. And just become more comfortable with how conjugation works in the present and future. Memorize the meanings of just these 10 verbs. It's not too much. And 5 of them are related to English words in some way, so that might help. And then always, always, always say the words aloud when reading, writing, or translating. And have a great week, everyone. Are there any questions? We have